In November of 1850, a pregnant woman walked barefoot into the frozen mountains of Tennessee and vanished without a trace. When her husband finally found her 3 weeks later, she was trapped inside a tree, surrounded by hundreds of bodies that had been feeding something ancient beneath the earth for centuries. This is a true horror story, and if you make it to the end, you'll understand why some places should never be disturbed. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And trust me, you're going to want to stay until the final episode, because what came out of that mountain was far worse than what went in. The morning Martha Whitfield vanished, the sky over the Cumberland Mountains hung low and gray, pregnant with unfallen snow. It was November 14th, 1850, and the air carried that peculiar stillness that settles over the Tennessee highlands before a storm. A silence so complete, it seemed to swallow sound before it could form. Sarah Whitfield had woken that morning with a sense of unease she couldn't name. Her daughter-in-law, Martha, 7 months heavy with child, had been restless all night. Sarah had heard her moving through the cabin, the floorboards creaking under her swollen feet, the rhythmic sound of the rocking chair by the window where Martha often sat when sleep eluded her. She was looking out toward Raven's Hollow. Sarah would later tell anyone who would listen, her weathered hands twisting at her apron, just staring out into that darkness like something was calling to her. By the time the sun, what little of it penetrated the heavy clouds, had reached its midday peak, Martha was gone. Thomas Whitfield, Martha's husband of 2 years, had been out checking his trap lines since before dawn. He returned home to find his mother frantic, her face pale as bone meal. "She was here when I went to gather eggs," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Not 30 minutes I was gone, Thomas. Not 30 minutes. And when I came back, the door was standing wide open and she was just gone." Thomas's jaw tightened. He was a hard man, made harder by the mountains. But fear flickered in his eyes, like a candle flame in wind. Did she take anything? Her shawl? Her boots? Sarah shook her head, and that's when the true terror of it settled over them both. Martha's heavy wool shawl still hung by the door. Her boots sat neatly beside the hearth, still holding the shape of her feet. The November air was cold enough to see your breath, cold enough to freeze the water in the wash basin overnight, and Martha had walked out into it in nothing but her thin house dress and bare feet. And she was carrying their child. Thomas didn't waste time with further questions. He grabbed his rifle, his hunting knife, and called for his hounds. Within an hour, he'd rallied his nearest neighbors, Jacob Morse, who lived 3 miles down the valley, and the Hendricks brothers, Daniel and Samuel, whose farm bordered the dark expanse of timber they called the Raven's Hollow. My Martha wouldn't just wander off, Thomas insisted as the men gathered in his yard. She's a sensible woman. Something's happened to her. Something, or someone. The hounds picked up her scent easily enough, following a trail that led straight from the Whitfield cabin toward the hollow. But as the search party approached the tree line, something strange happened. The dogs, which had been baying and pulling at their leads with fierce determination, suddenly stopped. All 3 of them sat down simultaneously, their bodies rigid, ears flat against their skulls. "Get up," Thomas commanded, yanking on the leads. "Find her, find!" But the hounds wouldn't budge. They began to whine, high-pitched and pitiful, and then one of them, a big red bone named Buck, threw back his head and howled. It was a sound Thomas had heard only twice before, both times when the dog had encountered a rattlesnake. It was the sound of abject terror. "Something ain't right here," Jacob Morse said, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. Jacob was 60 if he was a day, had lived in these mountains his entire life, and knew their moods and mysteries better than most. "We keep going," Thomas said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. They left the dogs tied to a tree and continued on foot. Martha's trail was easy to follow at first. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, footprints in the soft earth near a creek bed. But the tracks were wrong. They were too far apart, as if Martha had been running or taking impossibly long strides. And there was no sign that she'd hesitated or stumbled, despite the rough terrain and her bare feet. "Thomas?" Daniel Hendricks called out. He was kneeling beside a sweet gum tree, his face troubled. "Look at this." On the pale bark of the tree, about 5 feet up, were marks. Long, deep scratches that had torn through the bark to the white wood beneath. They could have been made by a bear, except bears didn't climb that high before marking trees, and the scratches were too straight, too deliberate. "These are fresh," Daniel said, running his finger along one of the gouges. "Made today, I'd wager." They found 3 more marked trees as they went deeper into the hollow, each one bearing those same strange scratches. The forest grew darker around them, the trees pressing closer, their branches weaving together overhead to block out what little light the overcast sky provided. It was Samuel Hendricks who found the first piece of Martha's dress. The fabric was caught on a blackberry bramble, a torn strip of the blue calico she'd been wearing. There was no blood on it, but the way it had been torn shredded really suggested violence or desperate flight. "Martha!" Thomas's voice echoed through the hollow. "Martha, answer me!" Only silence answered him. That thick, oppressive silence that seemed to have weight and texture. They found more pieces of her dress as they went, scattered like a trail of breadcrumbs, each strip taking them deeper into the hollow. With each discovery, Thomas's face grew more ashen, his movements more frantic. "This don't make no sense," Jacob muttered. "Why would she be tearing off her own clothes? In this cold?" Nobody had an answer. Nobody wanted to voice the thoughts that were beginning to form in their minds. Thoughts of madness, of possession, of things the old-timers whispered about after too much corn liquor loosened their tongues. The hollow had a reputation. There were stories, of course there were always stories, about places like this, dark places where the sun rarely reached and the wind made sounds like voices. The Cherokee had avoided this particular valley, according to the old maps and older memories. They'd had a name for it, something that translated roughly to "where the ground is hungry," or "the place that calls." When the white settlers had come, they'd renamed it Raven's Hollow for the huge flocks of ravens that roosted in the dead trees at its heart. But the unease remained. People didn't come here if they could help it. Game was scarce. The trees grew twisted. And sometimes, folks said, you could hear singing on the wind, soft and sweet and terrible. As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fail, the search party found themselves in the deepest part of the hollow. Here, the trees were ancient massive oaks and chestnuts that must have been standing when the first Europeans crossed these mountains. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of leaves that hadn't fully decomposed, as if something in the soil prevented the normal decay. And that's when they found the clearing. It was a perfect circle, perhaps 50 feet across, completely devoid of vegetation. The earth was dark, almost black, and had a strange texture, smooth and hard, like it had been baked in a kiln. At the center of the clearing stood a bluktu, single tree, dead and leafless, its branches reaching up like skeletal fingers, and hanging from one of those branches was the rest of Martha's dress. Thomas ran to it, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He pulled the dress down, held it against his chest like he was holding Martha herself. The dress was completely intact from that point up. It was as if she had simply stepped out of it, leaving it hanging there like a shed skin. "We need to get out of here," Jacob said, his voice urgent. "Now, before full dark." "I ain't leaving without my wife," Thomas said. But there was a hollowness to his voice, a growing realization that he might never see Martha alive again. "Look," Samuel said, pointing at the ground near the dead tree. Footprints, bare footprints, small enough to be Martha's, pressed into the hard earth. But they didn't lead away from the tree. They led toward it, and then they simply stopped, right at the base of the trunk, as if Martha had walked up to the tree and then ceased to exist. Daniel Hendricks, who prided himself on his tracking skills, who could follow a deer trail 3 days old through a rainstorm, knelt down and examined the ground carefully. When he stood up, his face was pale. "It's like she just sank into the earth," he said quietly. Or what?" Thomas demanded. Daniel didn't answer. He was staring at the tree trunk, at a split in the bark about waist high. It was wide enough, Thomas realized, with a sick feeling in his stomach, for a person to fit through. If a person were small enough, or desperate enough, or called strongly enough. "Martha!" Thomas shouted, moving toward the tree. Jacob grabbed his arm. "Don't," the old man said. "I know you want to find her, son, but not like this. Not here. We come back in the morning, with more men, with torches and axes. A sound cut him off. It started low, barely audible, rising from somewhere beneath their feet, or perhaps from the tree itself. It was a humming, melodic and strange, and underneath it, woven through it, was something that might have been words in a language that predated English, predated Cherokee, predated anything human at all. And then, clear as church bells on Sunday morning, they heard Martha's voice. "Thomas," she called. Her voice was soft, dreamy, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Thomas, I'm here. I'm waiting. Come and see our daughter. She's so beautiful, Thomas. She's waiting to meet her father." Thomas jerked against Jacob's grip. "That's her. That's Martha. She's alive. That ain't your wife," Jacob said, his voice hard. "I don't know what that is, but it ain't her. Come, Thomas," the voice called again, and now it was coming from the tree, from that dark split in its trunk. "Come and meet your daughter. Come down where it's warm, where we're waiting, where we're all waiting." The humming grew louder, and now they could hear other voices joining it, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all humming that same wordless melody. And underneath it all was a sound like breathing, like the earth itself was inhaling and exhaling in slow, deep breaths. "Run," Jacob said. "Run now." They didn't need to be told twice. The 4 men bolted from the clearing, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise they made or the direction they were going, only caring about getting away from that place, from that voice, from that terrible humming that seemed to follow them through the trees. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out, and only then did they realize they'd become separated. Thomas and Jacob had gone one way, the Hendricks brothers another. The forest around them was nearly pitch black now, and the temperature was dropping fast. "We need to keep moving," Jacob panted. "Need to get back to your cabin before full dark." But Thomas had stopped, was standing perfectly still, his head cocked to one side. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Jacob listened. At first, he heard nothing but the usual sounds of the forest at night, the whisper of wind through bare branches, the distant hoot of an owl. But then, underneath it all, he heard what Thomas had heard, singing. Soft and sweet, like a lullaby. And it was coming from behind them, back toward the hollow. "Oh, Martha, dear Martha, won't you come back to me? I'm lost in the hollow where the earth swallows 3. One for the mother, and one for the child, and one for the hunger that's ancient and wild." Thomas's face went white. "That's a song my mother used to sing." How does it know that song?" Jacob grabbed the younger man's shoulders. "Listen to me. Whatever is in that hollow, it ain't natural. It's old, older than us, older than our grandfathers, and it wants something. It wanted Martha, and now it wants you. We don't go back there. You hear me? We get help. We get the preacher. How can I leave her there?" Thomas's voice broke. "She's carrying my child, Jacob. If she's still alive and son, I pray she is. But we both know it don't look good. Then going back there alone in the dark ain't gonna help her. It's just gonna mean 2 people lost instead of 1. They made it back to the Whitfield cabin just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Sarah was waiting on the porch, a lantern in her hand, and when she saw Thomas's face, she knew without being told that Martha wasn't with him. That night, as the snow fell heavy and thick, blanketing the mountains in white, Thomas sat by his window and watched the direction of Raven's Hollow. And just before dawn, when the world was at its darkest, he heard it again, that soft, sweet singing, carrying on the wind. "Oh, Thomas, dear Thomas, won't you come back to me? I'm lost in the hollow where the ground calls to three." He pressed his face against the cold glass and wept. The next morning, Daniel and Samuel Hendricks were found by a neighbor. They'd made it almost all the way home, before collapsing from exhaustion and exposure. Samuel was unconscious, frostbitten, but alive. Daniel was dead, his eyes open and staring, his face locked in an expression of absolute terror. Clutched in his frozen hand was a lock of blonde hair, Martha's hair, tied with a ribbon the color of dried blood. And when they examined his body more closely, they found marks on his skin, covering his arms and chest, hundreds of tiny handprints, small enough to belong to an infant, pressed into his flesh like burns. The search for Martha Whitfield had only just begun, but already the mountains were claiming their price. And in the depths of Raven's Hollow, something very old and very patient continued to hum its tuneless melody, waiting for the next one to answer its call. For in the mountains, there are places where the ground is hungry, and what the ground takes, it rarely gives back. The funeral for Daniel Hendricks was held 3 days after his body was found. The snow had stopped falling, but a cold mist had settled over the valley, thick as wool, muffling sound and shrouding the mountains in gray. Reverend Josiah Blackwell presided over the burial, his voice carrying across the small cemetery as he spoke of God's mercy and the mysteries of his will. But Thomas Whitfield wasn't listening. He stood apart from the other mourners, his eyes fixed on the tree line in the distance, on the dark smudge that marked the entrance to Raven's Hollow. He hadn't slept in 3 days, couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that voice, Martha's voice, calling to him from beneath the earth. Sarah had tried everything to comfort her son. She'd made him his favorite meals, which he left untouched. She'd read to him from the Bible, but the words seemed to slide off him, like rain off oiled leather. She'd even gone so far as to bar his bedroom door from the outside one night, terrified that he would leave in the darkness to search for Martha alone. She needn't have bothered. Thomas had no intention of going into the hollow at night. He'd seen what happened to Daniel Hendricks. But daylight, that was another matter. "We need to talk." Thomas turned to find Reverend Blackwell standing beside him. The preacher was a tall man, gaunt and gray-haired, who'd been ministering to the mountain communities for 20 years. He'd seen his share of hardship and tragedy, but there was something in his eyes now that Thomas hadn't seen before, a wariness that bordered on fear. "What happened in that hollow?" Blackwell asked quietly. "And don't tell me you don't know. Jacob Morse came to see me yesterday. He told me things, strange things." Thomas looked at the Reverend for a long moment, then gestured toward the woods beyond the cemetery. They walked in silence until they were out of earshot of the other mourners. "I need your help," Thomas said. "I need you to help me find my wife." "Your wife is in God's hands now, Thomas." "Is she?" Thomas's voice was sharp. "Or is she in something else's hands?" Blackwell's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's something wrong with that hollow. Something that ain't natural. Something that took Martha and killed Daniel Hendricks." Thomas grabbed the preacher's arm. "I'm saying I need a man of God to help me fight whatever it is, because I don't know how to do it alone." The Reverend was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching Thomas's face. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard stories about that place," he said. "Old stories, Cherokee stories, from before my time here. There was a medicine man, name of Drowning Bear, who lived near here when I first came to these mountains. He warned me about certain places, places where the boundary between this world and others was thin, places where things could cross over, or pull people through. Did he say how to fight them? He said, some places are older than we are, older than our God, maybe. He said the best thing to do was stay away from them, let them sleep. But something woke it up, Thomas said. Something called Martha to it, and now it's got her. And I can't. His voice broke. I can't just leave her there, Reverend. I can't. Blackwell was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. Give me 2 days. I need to. Prepare. And we'll need others. Strong men. Faithful men. Jacob Morse will come, Thomas said. And I can get a few others. Men who knew Martha. Men who'll want to help. Then we'll go, Blackwell said. But Thomas, we go prepared, and we go as a group. Whatever's in that hollow, we don't face it alone or unprepared. Promise me. Thomas nodded, but his eyes had already shifted back toward the hollow, where the mist hung low and thick among the trees. Somewhere in that darkness, Martha was waiting. And with each passing hour, Thomas could feel the hollow's pull growing stronger. That night, Sarah woke to the sound of her son's voice. She found him standing at the window again, still wearing his burial clothes from the funeral, his forehead pressed against the cold glass. The baby's crying, he whispered. Can't you hear it, Mother? My daughter is crying for me. Sarah's blood ran cold. She moved to the window, stood beside Thomas, and listened. At first, she heard nothing but the usual night sounds, wind through the eaves, the creek running over stones. But then, carried on the wind from the direction of the hollow, she heard it too. A baby crying, thin and high and desperate, the sound of an infant in distress. Dear God, she breathed. I have to go to her, Thomas said, reaching for his coat. She needs me. That ain't your baby. Sarah grabbed his arm with surprising strength for a woman her age. That ain't Martha's baby. Martha's baby ain't born yet. But I can hear her. Thomas, listen to me. Sarah pulled him around to face her. Whatever's in that hollow, it knows you. It knows what you love, what you fear. It's using that against you. You go out there now, and you'll end up like Daniel Hendricks, or worse. But Martha, if Martha's alive, she needs you thinking clear, not running off into the dark like a fool. You wait. You wait for the Reverend, and you go with other men, in daylight. You promise me. Thomas's face crumpled. He sank down onto his bed, his head in his hands. I can't stop hearing her, Mother. Day and night, I hear her calling me. Sometimes it's Martha. Sometimes it's the baby. And sometimes. He looked up, his eyes haunted. Sometimes it's both of them, singing together. Sarah sat beside him and held him while he wept something he hadn't done since he was a boy and his father had died. Outside, the baby's cry faded slowly into the distance, replaced by that same wordless humming they'd heard in the clearing. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Samuel Hendricks, recovered from his ordeal in the hollow, arrived at the Whitfield cabin with a man Thomas didn't recognize. The stranger was Native American, elderly, with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. This is William Drowning Bear, Samuel said. Daniel's death. It ain't sitting right. He was my brother. I need to understand what happened to him, what we encountered in that hollow. Drowning Bear nodded to Thomas, then moved to the window, looking out toward the hollow. He stood there for several minutes without speaking, his face grave. The ground is hungry there, he finally said, his English accented but clear. My people knew this. Your people should have known it too, if you'd listened. What is it? Thomas asked. What's in that hollow? Many names, many stories. Drowning Bear turned to face them. Before my people came to these mountains, others lived here. Others who understood the earth differently, who knew how to speak to it, feed it, Keep it satisfied. Feed it? Sarah's voice was faint. Every spring, they would give offerings. Food. Animals. Sometimes, he paused, sometimes more, and in return, the earth gave them good hunting, healthy children, long life. It was a bargain, a balance. But those people are gone now, Samuel said. Yes, gone a long time. And the balance broke. The earth still remembers the old bargain, still expects to be fed, and when it gets too hungry, it calls out. It takes what it needs. My wife, Thomas said hoarsely. It took my wife. Drowning Bear's eyes were filled with something that might have been pity. Your wife was carrying life. The earth wants that most of all, new life, fresh life. It's why it took her and not you or the other men. It's why it killed the one who tried to resist. Daniel had those marks on him, Samuel said. Little handprints. What were those? The previous offerings, Drowning Bear said quietly. Still waiting, still hungry. The earth doesn't just take life. It keeps it, changes it, uses now. The room fell silent. Outside, a raven landed on the porch rail, its black eyes watching them through the window. Can she be saved? Thomas asked. Can I get Martha back? Drowning Bear was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. Maybe, but not by killing what holds her. You cannot kill the earth. You cannot fight it with guns or knives or even prayer. The earth is older than your God, older than mine. It simply is. Then how? By making a new bargain. By offering it something it wants more than your wife. Thomas felt his heart sink. What could it possibly want more than a pregnant woman? Drowning Bear's eyes met his, and in them Thomas saw ancient knowledge and terrible truth. Another pregnant woman. Or, he paused, or the one who seeks her. The husband. The father. Sometimes the earth prefers willing sacrifice to taken victims. It has more power. No, Sarah said sharply. Absolutely not. Thomas, you ain't considering— I am, Thomas said quietly. Of course I am. If it means getting Martha and my child back, it might not work, Drowning Bear interrupted. I tell you only what the old stories say. But those stories are old, passed down many generations. The truth may have changed in the telling. And even if the stories are true, the earth might not accept the bargain. It might take you both and still keep your wife. So we do nothing? Samuel demanded. We just let it keep Martha? Let my brother's death mean nothing? I didn't say that. Drowning Bear moved to the table, pulled out a chair, sat down. There is another way, harder, more dangerous, but possible. Everyone leaned in. The earth keeps what it takes in a place between places, not quite in this world, not quite in the next. A hollow place beneath the hollow. If someone were brave enough, faithful enough, they might be able to go there, to walk between, to find her and bring her back before the earth fully claims her. How? How long do we have? Thomas asked. The old stories say 9 days. 9 days from when she was taken. After that, the earth completes its claim, and she becomes part of it, forever. She would be. He searched for the word, transformed, no longer what she was. Thomas did the math quickly. That gives us 6 more days. But to walk between, Drowning Bear continued, you would need a guide, someone who knows the old ways, someone the earth might recognize and allow passage. He paused. I am old. I have lived a long life. My children are grown. My wife with our ancestors. I would guide you. For a price. Name it, Thomas said immediately. If we succeed, if we find your wife and bring her back, you must leave these mountains. You must take your family far from here and never return. The earth has marked you now. It will always call to you, and if you stay, eventually you will answer. One way or another. Thomas looked at his mother. Sarah's face was pale, but she nodded, slowly. "We'll go," Thomas said. "Whatever it takes." "Then we begin tonight," Drowning Bear said. "When the moon rises, we go to the clearing, to the dead tree, and I will open the way. But you must understand, once we go down, there is no guarantee we'll come back up. The hollow place is not meant for the living. It is hungry, and it is patient, and it does not give up its prizes easily." That afternoon, Reverend Blackwell arrived with 3 other men, Jacob Morse, and 2 brothers named Ethan and Isaiah Cole. They'd come prepared with torches, rope, axes, and faith. When they learned what Drowning Bear proposed to do, Blackwell was skeptical. "This sounds like heathen magic," he said. "We should be driving out this evil, not negotiating with it." "Your God is powerful in his realm," Drowning Bear replied calmly. "But this place belongs to something older. Your prayers may protect you, but they will not open the way. For that, you need the old words, the old ways. And if we refuse, then you may take your torches and your axes into the hollow and see how far they get you. But I tell you truly, Reverend, the earth does not fear fire or steel or holy water. It is patient. It has already won. We are only trying to steal back one of its prizes." In the end, they agreed. As the sun set and the temperature dropped, the group assembled in the Whitfield cabin. Sarah packed provisions, dried meat, cornbread, water skins. She moved mechanically, her lips moving in silent prayer. Drowning Bear prepared as well, but his preparations were different. He built a small fire in the hearth and began to burn herbs, sage and sweetgrass, and other plants Thomas didn't recognize. The smoke filled the cabin with a thick, pungent smell. He chanted softly in his own language, his voice rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to echo from somewhere very far away. As darkness fell, the group set out. 8 men, armed and provisioned, heading toward Raven's Hollow. Under a half-moon's light, the snow crunched under their feet, their breath steamed in the frigid air. And from the hollow ahead, that now familiar humming rose to greet them, welcoming them home. Thomas walked at the front of the group, his hand tight on his rifle, his heart hammering in his chest. He was coming, Martha. He was coming to bring her home. But as they entered the tree line and the darkness closed around them, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking into a mouth. A vast, patient mouth that had been open and waiting for a very long time. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, something that might have been laughter echoed through the trees, high and cold and utterly inhuman. The hunt for Martha Whitfield was about to take them places no living person should go, and not all of them would return. Under the pale light of the half-moon, the dead tree at its center seemed to writhe and twist, its shadow stretching across the bare ground like grasping fingers. The air was colder here, cold enough that Thomas's breath froze into crystals before it even left his lips. The humming they'd heard from the cabin was louder now, rising from the earth itself, resonating in their bones. "This is wrong," Isaiah Cole whispered. He was the younger of the 2 brothers, barely 20, and his face had gone white as milk. "We shouldn't be here. We should be quiet," Drowning Bear commanded. He'd stopped at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They're watching us. All of them." "Who?" Reverend Blackwell asked, raising his torch higher. "The offered ones, the taken. They circle this place, bound to it, neither alive nor dead. They'll let us pass for now. But on our way back," he shook his head. "That will be different." Thomas felt his skin crawl. He thought about Daniel Hendricks, about those tiny handprints burned into his flesh. How many children had been given to this place over the centuries? How many? Mothers, fathers, infants? How long did they remain, caught in that terrible in-between? "We need to create a circle," Drowning Bear said. "Protection. Not from the earth, nothing can protect us from that, but from the watchers, from the things that serve it." He directed them to form a ring around the dead tree, each man facing outward. Then he began to walk the perimeter, sprinkling something from a leather pouch ash mixed with bone meal and herbs, Thomas realized. As he walked, he chanted in his native tongue, his voice rising and falling in that same hypnotic rhythm. The humming from the earth grew louder in response. It was as if the hollow recognized what was happening and was calling out its protest, or perhaps its hunger. When Drowning Bear completed the circle, he returned to stand beside Thomas at the base of the tree. Up close, Thomas could see that the split in the trunk was wider than he'd remembered, easily wide enough for a man to fit through. And inside that split, darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the torchlight. "Before we go down," Drowning Bear said, loud enough for all to hear, "you must understand what we're walking into. The place beneath is not governed by the rules of the world above. Time moves differently there. Distance means nothing. And the earth, the entity that dwells there, it will test us. It will show us things designed to break our minds or our hearts. You must stay together. You must not believe everything you see. And most importantly," his eyes swept over each man in turn, "you must not accept anything it offers you, no matter how much you might want it." "What kind of things will it offer?" Ethan Cole asked. "Whatever you desire most, whatever you fear losing. It will show you loved ones thought dead. It will offer you riches, power, eternal life. All lies, all traps. Accept nothing, trust nothing, and follow only my voice." "And if we get separated?" Jacob Morse asked. "Then you're already dead. You just don't know it yet." The words hung in the cold air like an executioner's blade. Thomas saw several of the men exchange glances, saw hands tighten on weapons that would be useless where they were going. "Last chance to turn back," Drowning Bear said. "No shame in it. This is not your fight, not your burden. Only Thomas has a reason to risk this madness." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Reverend Blackwell stepped forward. "A shepherd does not abandon his flock," he said quietly. "Martha Whitfield is a member of my congregation. I go." One by one, the others echoed his commitment. Even young Isaiah, despite his fear, nodded. "Then we go now," Drowning Bear said. He pulled a knife from his belt, a stone blade, Thomas noticed, not metal, and made a cut across his palm. Blood welled up, dark in the moonlight. He pressed his hand against the split in the tree trunk. The response was immediate. The humming stopped, plunging them into an eerie silence. Then, the split began to widen, the dead wood peeling back like lips revealing a throat. That absolute darkness yawned before them, and from it came a smell, earth and rot, and something else, something ancient and terrible. "Single file," Drowning Bear commanded. "Stay close. Keep one hand on the person in front of you. Do not let go, no matter what you hear or see." He lit a torch from the fire they'd built at the clearing's edge, then stepped into the darkness. Thomas followed immediately, his hand on Drowning Bear's shoulder. Behind him came Reverend Blackwell, then Jacob, then the Cole brothers, and finally Samuel Hendricks, who'd insisted on coming despite everyone's protests. The moment Thomas crossed the threshold, everything changed. The cold vanished, replaced by a damp warmth that reminded him of a cellar in summer. The ground beneath his feet became soft, spongy, like walking on a mattress of mushrooms. The torch in Drowning Bear's hand barely penetrated the darkness. It created a small bubble of light around them. But beyond that was nothing but black. They were descending. Thomas could feel it in his legs, in the way his weight shifted forward. But there were no stairs, no slope, just that steady, undeniable sensation of going down, deeper and deeper beneath the earth. "How far do we have to go?" Thomas whispered. "Until we reach the bottom," Drowning Bear replied. "Or until the earth decides we've gone far enough." They walked in silence after that, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own fears. Thomas kept his eyes on the small circle of light around them, trying not to think about what might be lurking just beyond its reach. He could hear breathing not from the men around him, but from the walls themselves, if walls they were. The tunnel, or passage, or whatever this was, seemed to be alive, expanding and contracting rhythmically. Time became meaningless. They might have been walking for minutes or hours. Thomas's legs ached, but he couldn't tell if it was from the descent or from the unnatural quality of the space itself. Then Isaiah Cole screamed. The sound was so sudden, so full of terror, that everyone froze. Thomas spun around to see Isaiah staring at something off to the side, his face twisted in horror, his hand dropping away from his brother's shoulder. "Isaiah!" Ethan grabbed for him, but the young man stumbled backward, away from the group. "No," Isaiah moaned. "No, no, no. Father? Father, is that you?" Thomas peered into the darkness where Isaiah was looking but saw nothing, just the same impenetrable black. "Your father is dead?" Drowning Bear said sharply. 5 years dead. Whatever you're seeing, it's not him. Look away. Come back to us." "But he's right there," Isaiah insisted. His voice had taken on a dreamy quality. "He's calling me. He says he's been waiting. He says there's a place for me, a place where nothing hurts anymore." "Isaiah, listen to me," Reverend Blackwell said, his voice firm. "That is not your father. That is a lie the earth is showing you. Come back to the light. Come back to your brother." But Isaiah was already moving away, stepping into the darkness beyond their torchlight. Ethan lunged after him, but Jacob grabbed him. "Let him go," Jacob said hoarsely. "We can't save him. Not if he's chosen to go. He's my brother, and he's already lost. You go after him, you'll be lost too." They stood frozen, listening as Isaiah's footsteps faded into the distance. His voice drifted back to them, growing fainter. "Father, wait for me. I'm coming." Then silence, complete and absolute. "We keep moving," Drowning Bear said. His voice was hard, but Thomas could see the tightness around his eyes. "We knew there would be losses. The earth always takes its price." They continued in a subdued line, each man now keeping a death grip on the person in front of them. Thomas felt Reverend Blackwell's hand trembling on his shoulder, but said nothing. They were all afraid. Only a fool wouldn't be. The descent continued. And then, gradually, Thomas became aware of a change in the darkness around them. It was no longer uniformly black. He could make out shapes now, not clearly, but suggestions of form and structure. The walls of the passage were visible, covered in what looked like roots or veins, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence. "We're getting close," Drowning Bear said. "The heart of the hollow, where it keeps its treasures." The passage began to widen. The ceiling rose above them, disappearing into shadow. The ground became firmer, more stable. And ahead, Thomas could see a glow pale and sickly, like foxfire on a rotting log. They emerged into a cavern. It was vast. How vast? Thomas couldn't tell, because the walls curved away into darkness on all sides. But the space they could see was horrifying enough. The cavern floor was covered in what looked like soil, dark and rich, but moving, writhing. As Thomas's eyes adjusted, he realized with sick horror that the movement came from thousands, maybe millions, of pale, root-like tendrils that carpeted the ground, reaching and grasping like the tentacles of some vast underground creature. And growing from this living soil were trees, but not like any trees that grew in the world above. These were twisted, obscene parodies of trees, their trunks white as bone, their branches reaching upward like begging hands, and within each trunk, visible through translucent bark, were shapes, bodies, preserved, suspended, caught in the wood like flies in amber. Men, women, children, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stretching back into the darkness. Some were ancient, barely more than skeletons wrapped in dried skin. Others looked fresh, recently taken, their faces still showing the fear or confusion or resignation that had marked their final moments. "Dear God in heaven," Reverend Blackwell breathed. "Your God is not here," Drowning Bear said quietly. "Only the earth, and it has been collecting for a very, very long time." Thomas forced himself to look at the trees, searching desperately for Martha. But there were so many, too many. How would they ever find her in this forest of the dead? "The recent ones will be near the center," Drowning Bear said, as if reading his thoughts. "The earth keeps its newest prizes closest." "Come!" They moved forward, and the root tendrils beneath their feet reached up, wrapping around their ankles, their legs. Not restraining, not yet, but tasting them, learning them. Thomas felt them probe at his skin like cold, wet fingers, and had to fight the urge to run, screaming back toward the passage. As they went deeper into the cavern, the trees became less skeletal, more fleshed out. The bodies within them looked almost alive, eyes open, mouths slightly parted, hands pressed against the translucent bark from the inside. Thomas passed one tree containing a woman who couldn't have been more than 30, her belly swollen with pregnancy, her face locked in eternal sleep. "How long?" he asked. "How long do they stay?" "Aware. Some never sleep," Drowning Bear said. "They feel everything. The roots growing through them, the bark wrapping around them, the slow consumption of their essence. The earth feeds slowly. It can take years to fully drain a person. The pregnant ones," he paused. "The earth particularly values them. It keeps them conscious longer, to feed on their fear and their grief, as well as their life force." Thomas felt his gorge rise. The thought of Martha trapped like that, aware but helpless, watching as something grew inside her that wasn't her child anymore, but something else, something the earth wanted. "There," Samuel said suddenly, pointing. "That tree, that's fresh growth." They hurried forward. The tree Samuel had spotted was smaller than the others, its bark still soft and forming. And inside Martha! Thomas ran to the tree, pressing his ochais, hands against the bark. His wife was there, suspended in the heartwood, her eyes closed, her body still swollen with their child. She looked peaceful, almost serene, as if she were simply sleeping. "Is she alive?" Thomas asked desperately. "Can she hear me? Tem, can she hear me?" Drowning Bear came close, studying the tree carefully. He pressed his ear against the bark, listening. When he pulled back, his face was grave. "She lives, but the earth has already begun its claim. See?" He pointed to Martha's arms. Fine white roots had penetrated her skin, spreading beneath it like a network of veins. Another day, maybe two, and she would be too far gone. "We came just in time. How do we get her out?" "We cut her free. But you must understand, the earth will not give her up easily. The moment we begin, it will know. It will fight back. I don't care." Thomas said, "Do it. Do it now." Drowning Bear pulled out his stone knife. "Everyone, weapons ready. When the earth realizes what we're doing, it will send everything it has to stop us." The men formed a circle around the tree, facing outward. Jacob had his rifle raised. The Cole brothers held axes. Samuel had a large hunting knife. Reverend Blackwell gripped his torch in one hand and his Bible in the other. "On my mark," Drowning Bear said. He raised the knife, positioning it against the bark where it was thinnest. "Ready?" Thomas nodded, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Drowning Bear plunged the knife into the tree. The response was immediate and catastrophic. The cavern shook as if struck by an earthquake. The bioluminescent glow flared bright as daylight, then died to almost nothing. And from every direction came a sound, a shriek, so loud and so full of rage that it drove several of the men to their knees. The root tendrils on the ground erupted upward, no longer gentle but violent. wrapping around legs and arms and throats. Jacob fired his rifle at the closest mass of roots, and for a moment they recoiled, but then surged back with renewed fury. "Cut faster!" Thomas shouted. He grabbed at the roots, trying to wrap around Drowning Bear, ripping them away with his bare hands. They were cold and slimy and incredibly strong, and where they touched his skin, they left marks like burns. Drowning Bear worked the knife around the edge of the tree, cutting through bark and wood that seemed to fight back, growing thicker even as he cut. Black sap oozed from the cuts, smoking where it hit the ground. From the darkness beyond their small circle of light came sounds of movement, shuffling footsteps, wet breathing. And then they emerged into the light, the offered ones, the taken. They had once been human. Some still looked almost normal, pale, emaciated, their clothes rotted away, but recognizably people. Others had been changed by their time in the earth. Roots grew through their bodies, breaking through skin and wrapping around bones. Their eyes were empty sockets, filled with writhing tendrils, their mouths opened too wide, revealing throats that went down forever. "Oh, sweet Jesus," Ethan Cole whispered. There were dozens of them. No, hundreds, emerging from between the trees, shambling toward the group with jerky, uncoordinated movements. At the front was a small figure, a child, no more than 5 or 6. Her dress, the rotted remains of something that had been white. And Thomas recognized her. Emily Hendricks, Daniel and Samuel's niece. She disappeared 7 years ago while playing near the woods. They'd searched for weeks, had found nothing. "Uncle Samuel, the thing that had been," Emily said. Her voice was dusty, unused. "Uncle Samuel, why did you leave me here? Why didn't you find me?" Samuel made a choking sound. His knife wavered. "That's not Emily," Thomas said sharply. "That's not your niece. It's just wearing her face." But Samuel was backing away, tears streaming down his face. "Emily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We looked everywhere. We never stopped looking." "Then look at me now," the Emily thing said. "See what I became. See what you let happen to me." "Samuel, don't listen!" Reverend Blackwell grabbed the man's arm. "It's trying to break you." "It's trying to—" Samuel tore free and stumbled toward the child. She smiled a terrible, too wide smile and opened her arms to him. "Come, Uncle. Come down where it's warm, where we can be family again." The other figures surged forward as Samuel reached the child. They swarmed over him, pulling him down, and his screams echoed through the cavern. Thomas tried to go to him, but Jacob held him back. "He's gone," Jacob said. "Focus on Martha. That's why we came." Drowning Bear had cut halfway around the tree now, but it was getting harder. The wood was fighting back, growing new bark faster than he could cut it. And the sap was eating through his knife blade, weakening it. "I need another blade," he shouted. Ethan tossed him an axe. Drowning Bear caught it and swung hard at the tree trunk. The impact reverberated through the cavern. Again. Chunks of wood, flying, black sap spraying. The shambling figures were getting closer. Jacob fired his rifle again and again, but bullets barely slowed them. Ethan and Reverend Blackwell swung axes and torches, trying to keep them back. But there were too many. And then the tree cracked. It was a sound like bones breaking, sharp and final. The bark split open, and Martha's body began to slide forward. Thomas lunged forward and caught her, pulling her free of the wood and the roots that had been growing through her. She was cold, so cold. Her skin was pale, her lips blue, and for one terrible moment Thomas thought they were too late. But then her chest rose a shallow, struggling breath and her eyes fluttered open. "Thomas?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," he sobbed. "I'm here. I've got you." Martha's eyes focused on him, and he saw recognition, confusion, fear. "Where? What happened?" "I was in the cabin, and then I heard singing. And her hand moved to her belly. "The baby. Is the baby? We need to move," Drowning Bear said urgently. "Now, the earth knows we've taken her. It will collapse this entire chamber rather than let her go." Already, the cavern was shaking. The bone-white trees were toppling, crashing down around them. The ground itself was heaving, those root tendrils writhing in fury. The shambling figures had stopped their advance and were retreating, melting back into the darkness, not from fear, Thomas realized, but because they knew what was coming. "Back to the passage!" Drowning Bear shouted. "Run!" Thomas scooped Martha into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as if the earth had already begun draining her substance, and ran. The others followed, racing across the writhing ground, dodging falling trees and grasping roots. Behind them, the cavern was collapsing, the ceiling cracking, great chunks of stone and earth crashing down. The shrieking had become a constant howl, a sound of pure rage and loss. They reached the passage just as a massive boulder crashed down where they'd been standing moments before. Single file again, racing up through the darkness, no longer caring about formation or caution, just running, climbing, fighting their way back toward the surface. Thomas could feel Martha stirring in his arms, could hear her whimpering with pain as the roots that had penetrated her body began to wither and die, leaving burning wounds in their wake. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. The passage seemed longer going up than it had coming down. Time stretched. Thomas's lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind them, he could hear the earth pursuing, the walls of the passage collapsing section by section. And then, a headlight, the pale light of the moon, shining through the split in the dead tree. "Almost there!" Drowning Bear gasped. "Don't stop!" "Don't." The old man stumbled. His foot caught on something, and he went down hard. Before anyone could react, the walls of the passage constricted, roots shooting out to grab him. "Go," he shouted. "Get her out. Get her to safety. We can't leave you." Thomas started to turn back, but Drowning Bear's eyes blazed with fury. "You will not let her sacrifice be meaningless. Run, now." Jacob grabbed Thomas's arm and pulled him forward. Together, they burst through the split in the tree trunk and out into the clearing. The cold November air hit them like a slap, shocking after the warm dampness of the hollow. Thomas kept running, not stopping until they were well beyond the clearing, back into the normal forest where the trees grew straight and the ground was just ground. Only then did he fall to his knees, still holding Martha, gasping for air. Jacob collapsed beside him. Ethan staggered past them and vomited. Reverend Blackwell leaned against a tree, his face gray, his Bible clutched to his chest. Behind them, from the clearing, came a sound like thunder. They turned to see the dead tree exploding, splinters and fragments flying in all directions. The split in its trunk sealed shut. The earth around it buckled and subsided, as if something underneath had given up and gone back to sleep. Thomas looked down at Martha. Her eyes were open, watching him. There was confusion there, and pain, but also recognition. She was still herself, still his Martha. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," he lied, because he knew it would never truly be over. The hollow had marked them all, and in the years to come, they would hear it calling on quiet nights, singing its wordless song, reminding them of what lived beneath the mountains. But for now, for this moment, they were free. 4 men had entered the hollow. 4 men had gone down into the earth. Only 3 came back out, carrying 1 rescued soul. The price had been paid. The question was whether it had been worth it. As they made their way back to the Whitfield cabin in the pre-dawn darkness, none of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line. She looked like Emily Hendricks, or what Emily Hendricks would have looked like if she'd lived to see her 12th year. She stood perfectly still, her head cocked to one side, listening to something only she could hear. Then she smiled and melted back into the trees. The earth was patient. It had all the time in the world. 3 weeks after Martha's rescue, the first snow of December fell on the Cumberland Mountains. It came down heavy and wet, blanketing the valley in white, muffling sound, softening edges. Inside the Whitfield cabin, a fire crackled in the hearth, and Martha sat in her rocking chair by the window, watching the snow fall. She hadn't spoken much since they'd brought her back. The physical wounds had healed the marks where the roots had penetrated. Her skin had scarred over, leaving pale tracks on her arms and legs that looked like lightning strikes frozen in flesh. But other wounds went deeper, and Thomas didn't know how to reach them. Dr. Morrison from Knoxville had examined her twice. He'd been cautious, professional, but Thomas had seen the concern in his eyes. "The baby seems healthy," he'd said. "Heartbeat is strong, but Mrs. Whitfield, she's not well. Not in body, perhaps, but in spirit. Keep her warm. Keep her fed. And for God's sake, don't let her near those woods." That last part wouldn't be a problem. Martha wouldn't go outside at all. She sat by that window day after day, rocking slowly, one hand on her swollen belly, staring out at nothing. Or perhaps not nothing. Perhaps at something only she could see. Sarah tried to draw her out, with conversation, with food, with reading from the Bible. Martha would nod politely, eat a little, listen with that same distant expression. But she wasn't really there. Some essential part of her, the part that laughed at Thomas's jokes, that sang while she worked, that had made him fall in love with her, that part was still down in the hollow. "Give her time," Reverend Blackwell had counseled. "She's been through an ordeal we can barely imagine. The mind needs time to heal, just like the body." But Thomas was beginning to fear that time wouldn't be enough. He'd tried talking to her about it once, a week after they'd brought her home. He'd sat beside her, taken her hand, asked her what she remembered. "I remember the singing," she'd said softly. "So beautiful, Thomas. Like angels, but older than angels. Older than everything. And I remember going to it, toward it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because it promised." She'd trailed off, her eyes going distant again. What did it promise? Everything. Peace, purpose, a place where I belonged, where the baby would be. She'd touched her belly. Special, important, part of something vast and eternal. But it was a lie, Martha. Whatever you saw, whatever, you felt it was trying to consume you. Was it? She'd looked at him then, really looked at him, and her eyes had been full of something he couldn't name. Or was I being offered something precious, and you took it away? The words had chilled him to his core. He hadn't brought it up again. The others from the rescue party were dealing with their own aftermath. Jacob Morse had developed a tremor in his hands that wouldn't go away. He'd given up trapping, unable to trust his grip anymore. Ethan Cole had moved his family to Kentucky, swearing he'd never set foot in those mountains again. Reverend Blackwell still conducted services, but his sermons had changed. He spoke less of God's love and more of mysteries beyond human comprehension, of things that lurked in the spaces between the known and the unknown. And Drowning Bear. Thomas tried not to think about the old man, about his sacrifice, about what might be happening to him down in the earth, assuming he wasn't already dead. The guilt was a constant weight on Thomas's chest. Samuel Hendricks, too. Both brothers, taken by the hollow. Daniel dead. Samuel. Something worse than dead. Thomas had dreams about him sometimes. About all of them, Samuel and Drowning Bear and Isaiah Cole, trapped in those bone-white trees, aware but unable to move or speak or die, feeding the earth's endless hunger. But worst were the dreams about Emily, the little girl who'd smiled too wide and called to her uncle. Thomas would wake gasping, certain he'd heard a child's voice outside the cabin window, singing that wordless melody. 2 weeks after the rescue, something happened that changed everything. Thomas was out gathering firewood when he heard Martha scream. He dropped the axe and ran, his heart in his throat, terrified that she'd gone into early labor or that the baby was in distress. He found her on the floor of the cabin, Sarah kneeling beside her, both women staring at something on Martha's belly.
"What is it?"
"What's wrong?" "Look," Sarah whispered, her face pale. Thomas knelt down. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, just Martha's swollen stomach, her dress pulled up to expose the skin. But then he saw what had frightened them: movement, under the skin. But not the normal movements of a baby kicking or shifting. This was different. It looked like something was pressing against the inside of her belly from within, making distinct shapes, handprints, small handprints, pushing outward. "Jesus Christ," Thomas breathed. As they watched, the handprints moved, tracing across Martha's belly from left to right, as if something inside was crawling. And then they stopped, right over her navel, and pressed outward hard enough that Thomas could see the individual fingers. Martha was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "It's not right," she whispered. "The baby's not right. I can feel it, Thomas. It's not ours anymore." Dr. Morrison came again, examined Martha thoroughly. He had no explanation for what they'd described. "The baby seems healthy," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sometimes in the late stages of pregnancy, the mother can feel very strong movements. Perhaps in her delicate state, Mrs. Whitfield is misinterpreting normal fetal activity as, "This wasn't normal," Sarah interrupted. "I've helped birth dozens of babies, doctor. I know what normal looks like. This wasn't it." Morrison left strict instructions that Martha was to be monitored closely and that they should fetch him immediately when labor began. After he left, Sarah pulled Thomas aside. "We need to prepare for the possibility," she said quietly, "that the baby won't be right." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that thing in your wife's belly spent weeks growing in that cursed place, connected to her while those roots grew through her, fed by whatever feeds the hollow." Sarah's eyes were hard. "I'm saying we might need to make a choice between saving Martha and saving the child. Mother, I know you don't want to hear it, but someone needs to say it. If that baby comes out wrong, if it's something other than human, we might have to—" "No," Thomas's voice was firm. "We're not killing my child based on fear and superstition." "Is it superstition? After what you saw down there? After what we know lives in that hollow?" Thomas had no answer. The truth was, he didn't know what to believe anymore. The world he'd grown up in, a world of simple faith, of clear right and wrong, of natural laws that could be trusted, that world had been shattered. Now he lived in a world where the earth could be hungry, where the dead could walk, where ancient things slept beneath the mountains and called out to the living. That night, Thomas lay beside Martha in their bed, listening to her breathe. She slept fitfully, whimpering in her dreams. He placed his hand gently on her belly and felt movement beneath his palm. Strong kicks, rolls, the vigorous activity of a healthy baby. Or something pretending to be one. "Please," he whispered into the darkness. "Please let me be wrong. Please let this baby be normal. I'll do anything. I'll leave these mountains like Drowning Bear said. I'll go far away and never come back. Just, please, God, let my child be human." The baby kicked hard against his hand, as if in response. And from somewhere far away, or perhaps very close, pressed right up against the cabin walls, came the sound of humming, that wordless, ancient melody, the song of the hollow. Martha's labor began 3 days before Christmas. It started in the pre-dawn darkness with a sharp cry from Martha. Thomas woke to find her sitting up in bed, both hands clutching her belly, her face contorted with pain. "It's time," she gasped. "Thomas, it's coming." Sarah was already up, had already started boiling water and preparing the clean linens they'd set aside. She sent Thomas to fetch Dr. Morrison and the midwife, Mrs. Patterson, who lived 2 miles away. By the time Thomas returned with both women, Martha's contractions were coming hard and fast. Too fast, Mrs. Patterson said with concern. First, babies usually took their time. This one seemed eager to be born. They sent Thomas out of the room, a woman's domain. They said, no place for men during the messy business of birth. He paced in the main room, listening to Martha's cries, his heart hammering. Jacob Morse had come to sit with him, offering silent support, a bottle of whiskey passing between them. Whatever happens, Jacob said quietly, whatever comes out, you be ready for it. Thomas nodded. He'd already decided. If the baby was wrong, truly wrong, monstrous, he'd do what needed to be done, quickly, mercifully, and then he'd take Martha far from here, before the Hollow could claim anything else from them. Hours passed. The sun rose, pale and weak through heavy clouds. Martha's screams intensified, and Thomas heard Mrs. Patterson's voice, sharp with concern. Something's wrong. The baby's positioned wrong, turned around somehow. We need to turn it, Doctor, Morrison said. There's no time. It's coming whether we're ready or not. More screaming. Thomas gripped the whiskey bottle so hard he thought it might shatter. Jacob put a hand on his shoulder. And then, cutting through all the chaos, a new sound. A baby's cry. Thin and high and startlingly normal. Thomas was up and moving before he knew it, pushing through the door into the bedroom. Sarah tried to stop him, but he shoved past her. The scene before him was chaotic, blood-soaked linens, Martha pale and sweating on the bed, Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Morrison working frantically. And in the midwife's arms, wrapped in a blanket, was a baby. Is it? Thomas couldn't finish the question. Mrs. Patterson looked up at him, her face unreadable. Slowly, she pulled back the blanket. The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, soft pink skin, a cap of dark hair. She, it was a girl, had Thomas's nose and Martha's chin. Her eyes were closed, her tiny mouth working, already seeking to nurse. She looked utterly, completely, beautifully normal. Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank God. Thank God. There's something else, Dr. Morrison said quietly. Thomas looked at him, saw the strange expression on the doctor's face. What? The baby. There's something unusual. Not wrong exactly, but... Morrison gestured to the baby's back. Look, Mrs. Patterson turned the infant slightly. There, running down the baby's spine from the base of her skull to her tailbone, was a mark. Not a birthmark exactly, more like a scar or a brand. It was pale against the pink skin, and it formed a pattern that made Thomas's stomach clench. It looked like roots, or veins, or the branching pattern of a tree. What is that? He asked. I don't know, Morrison admitted. I've never seen anything like it. It doesn't seem to be causing her any distress. It's just there. Martha's weak voice came from the bed. Let me see her. Let me see my baby. Mrs. Patterson carried the infant to her mother. Martha's arms shook as she took the child, pulled her close. For a long moment, she just stared at her daughter's face. Then tears began to fall. She's beautiful, Martha whispered. My beautiful girl. My... She froze, her eyes going wide. Thomas. What is it? She's not crying anymore. But her eyes. Thomas, look at her eyes. The baby had opened them, and Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. The eyes themselves were normal blue, like Martha's, but there was something behind them, something looking out, something ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. As Thomas watched, the baby smiled. Not the reflexive smile of a newborn, but a deliberate, knowing smile. And her tiny hand reached up, pressed against Martha's chest, right over her heart. Oh, Martha breathed. Oh. I understand now. I understand what it wanted, what it gave us. Martha, what are you talking about? But Martha wasn't listening. She was staring at her daughter with an expression of wonder and terror mixed together. She's a bridge, Martha said softly. Don't you see? The hollow couldn't keep me, but it didn't let me go for nothing. It sent part of itself with me, through her. No. Thomas reached for the baby, but Martha pulled her away. She's ours, Thomas, our daughter, but she's also more. She'll be special, important, and as long as she lives, as long as she stays close to these mountains, the hollow will be quiet. It got what it wanted. A door into our world. Dear God, Mrs. Patterson breathed. We need a priest. The baby laughed. It was a sound no newborn should be able to make, full-throated, delighted. And as she laughed, the mark on her back began to glow, very faintly, with that same sickly bioluminescence they'd seen in the cavern. She needs a name, Martha said. Her voice had taken on that dreamy quality again, the one she'd had when she'd first come back from the hollow. The earth showed me. Her name is Raven. Raven Whitfield. Martha. No. We can't. She's our daughter, Thomas. Martha looked up at him, and her eyes were fierce now, protective. Whatever else she might be, she's ours. And I won't let anyone hurt her. Not you, not the doctor, not God himself. Do you understand? Thomas looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the impossible situation he found himself in. He thought about the promise he'd made to leave these mountains, to go far away. But could he take this child with him? Would distance even matter if she carried the hollow inside her? Or had the hollow finally won after all? Everyone out, he said quietly. Give us some privacy, please. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Patterson exchanged glances, but complied. Sarah lingered in the doorway, her face troubled, but finally she too left. Jacob pulled the door shut behind them. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed beside Martha and looked down at his daughter, Raven. She was watching him with those two knowing eyes, that slight smile still playing at her lips. What do we do? He asked. We love her, Martha said simply. We raise her. We teach her to be good and kind, and maybe she'll be the bridge between worlds that can keep the peace. Maybe she's not a curse, but a gift, a chance to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. And if she's not? If she's something darker? Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and kissed her daughter's forehead. The baby cooed, a perfectly normal baby sound. Then we'll face that when we come to it, Martha said. Together. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to protest. But as he looked at his daughter, at her tiny fingers wrapped around Martha's thumb, at the way she nuzzled against her mother's breast, he felt something break inside him. She was his child. Monster or miracle, bridge or curse, she was his. Raven, he said, testing the name. The baby turned her head toward him, those blue eyes focusing on his face. Raven Whitfield. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, and from the direction of Raven's Hollow, carried on the wind, came the sound of humming. But it was different now, not calling, not hunting. More like satisfaction, like a hunger finally sated. Or perhaps like a hunter that had successfully laid a trap and was now watching it spring shut. The story of Martha Whitfield's disappearance would become legend in those mountains. The details would blur and change over the years. Some said she'd been rescued from a cave-in, others that she'd been held by raiders or had suffered from a fever dream that made her wander. But the truth, the real truth, was known only by a handful of people who never spoke of it. And in time, those people began to die. Jacob Morse passed first, just a year after Raven's birth. He fell from his porch in the middle of the night or so, the official story went. But his wife found him with that same expression Daniel Hendricks had worn. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. and covering his arms were those tiny handprints, burned into his skin like brands. Ethan Cole made it 5 years in Kentucky before the hollow found him. They said he walked into the woods one autumn evening and never came back. Search parties found his body 3 days later, his feet bare and bloody, positioned at the base of a dead oak tree, as if he'd been trying to walk into it. Reverend Blackwell lasted the longest. He continued preaching, continued ministering to his flock, but those who knew him said he was never the same. He became obsessed with studying ancient religions, pagan rituals, things that had nothing to do with Christianity. His final sermon, delivered on a cold January morning in 1863, was about the old gods, the ones that existed before Scripture, before civilization, before humanity itself. "We think we conquered this land," he told his confused congregation, "but the land was never ours to conquer. It was only sleeping. And now it's waking up." He was found dead in his study that night, his Bible open to a page where he'd written a single sentence over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. "The roots remember. The roots remember. The roots remember." As for Thomas and Martha Whitfield, they kept their promise, sort of. They didn't leave the mountains, couldn't bring themselves to abandon the only home they'd ever known. But they built a new cabin, far from Raven's Hollow, on the other side of the valley. They lived quiet lives, kept to themselves, raised their daughter, and Raven grew. She was a beautiful child, everyone said so. Bright, curious, charming. She never got sick, never seemed to feel pain. Animals were drawn to her, especially birds, ravens, and crows would flock to wherever she was playing, perching in the trees around her, watching with their intelligent black eyes. But there were odd things, too. Things Martha and Thomas tried to ignore. The way plants grew faster wherever Raven walked. The way people who upset her would fall ill with strange maladies that doctors couldn't diagnose. The way she sometimes spoke in a language that predated English, words that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep and ancient, and the mark on her back never faded. If anything, it grew more pronounced as she aged. The root-like pattern spreading slowly, branching out across her shoulders, down her legs. By the time she was 10, it covered most of her body, a living map of something vast and intricate that existed just beneath her skin. Martha died when Raven was 12. She went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. And when they prepared her body for burial, they found that the root-like scars on her arms, the marks from her time in the hollow, had turned green, as if new growth had started in them. Thomas lived another 20 years, watching his daughter grow into a woman unlike any other. She never married, never left the valley. She would walk the mountains alone for days at a time, and when she returned, she always brought stories of the deep places, the old places, the places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. People in the valley came to respect her and fear her in equal measure. They called her the Hollow Woman, not because she was empty, but because she carried the hollow inside her, and they learned not to cross her, not to venture too close to certain places she marked as sacred, not to ask too many questions about where she went or what she did in the darkness of the new moon. The hollow itself grew quiet after Raven's birth. No more disappearances, no more strange songs on the wind. The dead tree where Thomas had found Martha rotted away to nothing, and new growth sprung up in the clearing, healthy, normal trees that bore no resemblance to the bone-white horrors beneath. But sometimes, late at night, those who lived near the valley would hear humming, soft and distant, rising from the earth itself, and they would bar their doors and pray, and in the morning they would find small footprints in the frost outside their homes, the prints of many feet, all heading in the same direction, toward wherever Raven Whitfield had chosen to walk that night, because the hollow had won, you see. It hadn't gotten Martha not completely, but it had gotten something better. It had gotten a daughter, a bridge between worlds, a door that would never close. And through that door, on certain nights when the moon was dark and the air was cold, things still crossed over. Things that wore human faces but moved with insect precision. Things that sang in voices older than memory. Things that remembered a time when the earth was worshipped and feared and fed. The Whitfields had saved Martha's life, but in doing so, they'd given the hollow exactly what it wanted: a foothold in the world above, a permanent presence, a legacy that would outlive them all. And in the mountains of Tennessee, in places where the old trees grow thick and the ground feels soft beneath your feet, that legacy continues to this day. There are valleys that don't appear on any map, hollows that locals know to avoid, and sometimes hikers disappear. Not many, just enough to keep the hunger satisfied. The earth is patient. After all, it has all the time in the world. And in Raven's Hollow, deep beneath the roots and the stone, something ancient still waits, still watches, still calls out in that wordless song, looking for the next one who'll be foolish enough to answer. Because the ground is hungry. It's always hungry, and it will never, ever stop feeding. And that's the end of The Hollow Woman. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? I've got dozens more true horror stories from America's darkest corners. And trust me, they only get more terrifying from here. Drop a comment and let me know. Would you have gone down into that hollow to save someone you loved? Or would you have let them go? I want to know where you draw the line. Also, if you're from Tennessee or anywhere near those Cumberland Mountains, let me know in the comments. Have you ever heard stories about places like Raven's Hollow? Places where people just disappear? Because here's the thing about these stories. They always start with a kernel of truth. Before you go, make sure you check out the next video popping up on your screen. It's about a lighthouse keeper in Maine who discovered something living in the fog, something that had been waiting for over 100 years. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. And remember, some places are better left undisturbed. I'll see you in the next one, if you're brave enough to come back. Stay curious, stay safe, and whatever you do, don't answer if you hear something singing in the woods at night.